Good morning. My name's Tom Rooney from the 16th District of Florida. We're here today to talk about an amendment which I filed, which will strike $450 million from the budget to eliminate the second engine for the F-35 fighter. This basically boils down to a luxury that we cannot afford. The election last November spoke loud and clear to us, and we're joined here by some freshmen who you'll hear from in a minute, to tell the American people that when we talk about cutting spending, we're serious. And that goes to things that cut across party lines and go to things that may have traditionally been things we would consider a luxury or a benefit in the past, which we can no longer consider anymore. We're in the third straight year of trillion-dollar deficits, and our national debt is more than $14 trillion. We have to cut spending everywhere we can. It will cost another $3 billion to complete this engine, which our military leaders, President Bush, President Obama, Secretary Robert Gates, who just yesterday said that he will use every means possible to kill this second engine, have all said that they don't want it. It's only Congress with the approval rating that's in the basement, which has been sent a clear message in the election in November that wants to keep this second engine. Well, we're up here to tell you that we're no longer supporting that, and which is why I have offered this amendment. This is a bipartisan amendment. As you can see, we're joined by Representative Larson and Pingree from the Democratic side of the aisle, as well as Representative Westmoreland, Dold, and Griffin, the two freshmen who are up here on stage with me today. We'll hear from in a minute. This isn't about parochial interests. For us standing here, this is about what we can afford and what we cannot afford anymore. And what the election in November said, $450 million is going to have a chance to be cut on this vote, and I'm happy to be one of the lead sponsors to offer that amendment. So with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Larson from the Democrat side of the aisle, and then we'll continue to hear from everybody, and then we'll take your questions. Mr. Larson.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Tom. First and foremost, let me credit Tom Rooney and Lynn Westmoreland, and I'm pleased that they're joined by their colleagues from the House as well. I think this is a mini profiles in courage, if you will, when you, as they did last year, take on their own leadership in what is a tough issue, but one that, as Tom points out, is nonpartisan. Clearly, yesterday when Secretary Gates spoke, he made, without hesitation and with all due candor, spoke, as Tom has indicated, that both President Bush and President Obama have attempted to get rid of a second engine that neither the Pentagon, the Air Force, the Navy, or the Marines want. An engine that will cost $450 million this year and $3 billion overall. This simply can't stand in these very difficult economic times where everybody recognizes that we're going to have to make cuts. I was at a press conference earlier this morning. I was asked, well, where are Democrats and Republicans working together? And I said very clearly, on the alternate engine. This is an area that is nonpartisan in an effort, but recognizes, as so many of the new members of Congress have, that this is the poster child for wasteful spending. When you have the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, the Center for American Progress, Citizens Against Government Waste, all lining up, conservative, liberal, all recognizing that this is an area where we need to come together. It's our sincere hope that the Rooney amendment succeeds. I'm pleased to join him in that amendment and honored to stand with him as we seek to eliminate this wasteful spending that occurs. As you may know, this amendment goes into a Republican proposed concept of putting this in a lockbox to pay down the deficit. we also, both on the Democratic and Republican side, recognize that we have to deal with cutting spending and deal with the deficit. This is a prime example of where we can work together. What I submit today, if we can't do it here, where the forces are all lined up, where can we? And with that, I'll turn that back to Tom. Lynn?
Thank you. Thank you, John. And I think you make a great point that if there's an area where we can be bipartisan and work together, I don't think there's a better one than this. President Bush, President Obama, Secretary Gates, who worked under both of those presidents, and just the balance that we had, I think, in the last Congress shows that this is the bipartisan thing, especially taking the $450 million and paying down the deficit. But I want to thank all of you that are here today, all my colleagues, especially the two freshmen, the gentleman from Illinois and the gentleman from Arkansas. I'm happy to be joining them to talk about this dual engine because this is something that has been successful. I mean, if you look at the 135 engine, it's got about 200,000 flying hours. It's got 23 vertical landings. It's worked perfectly. As John said, the Marines don't want it. The Navy doesn't want it. The Air Force doesn't want it. The Pentagon doesn't want it. And I don't know how much clearer we can be. I mean, we've got to come to the reality that we're broke. And this is luxury spending. And I think if you look at the chart here, you can see of the 28 military planes that we have, both fixed wing and rotary wing, only one plane, the F-16, has a dual source engine. The other 27 don't. And it's been successful. I think Secretary Gates has made the point that he has no problem with what some of the opponents of going to the single engine have said has been risk. The F-22 only has a sole source engine. We've not had those risks. He's not expecting any risks. There won't be any risks. This has been a successful engine, and we look for it to continue to perform. So with that, I'll turn it over to the gentlelady from Maine, Ms. Pingree.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, and thank you to Representative Rooney for organizing this, and Mr. Larson for working with me on this issue, and to all of my colleagues who are up here today. I'm very pleased to be standing next to some of my Republican colleagues as well as Democratic, because I think it shows, as others have said, this isn't a partisan issue. This is just a common sense issue. Democrats and Republicans alike can see that spending money for a second F-35 engine is a waste of money. The only people who think this are a good idea are the people who will make big profits on the contracts at the expense of American taxpayers, expenses they can't afford anymore. As you've heard my colleagues say, the Bush administration did not want this engine, the Obama administration doesn't want this engine, and the Pentagon tells us it's unnecessary. The only reason it keeps getting funded is because it's a giveaway to a powerful defense contractor who hires the lobbyists to keep it alive. The current engine is built by a world-class workers around the country, including some at the Pratt & Whitney plant in my home state of Maine. If a second engine is funded, at least 40% of it would be built in the United Kingdom, eliminating jobs in the United States. A second engine is a waste of money, and it sends jobs overseas. When the Pentagon put the F-35 out to bid, there was a competition. One company won that competition, and another lost. That's what competition is about. There's a winner and a loser. Unfortunately, sometimes in the convoluted world of Washington, if the loser has deep enough pockets, they can hire expensive lobbyists and convince their friends in Congress to go back and change the rules. In my opinion, that's what's happening with the F-35 engine now, and the only losers will be the American taxpayers. I'm here to join my colleagues in saying let's put an end to wasteful, unnecessary spending this year once and for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Pingree. And now we're going to hear from two of our freshmen. First, Representative Griffin from Arkansas.
Thank you so much. There's an old saying in Arkansas that if you take care of your pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. And I ran last year because of my 3.5-year-old and my 11-month-old with a focus on getting spending under control. And when I came up here, I couldn't look myself in the eye and say that there's no waste in the Pentagon. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I'm serving the military still to this day as a reservist. I'm a strong believer in our troops and national security. But waste is waste, and we've got to cut waste wherever we may find it. And so I didn't know much about this issue when I got up here. I dug into it. I researched it. I listened to the arguments on both sides, talked to a lot of my colleagues, and just decided that I couldn't support the funding for the second engine for two main reasons. Number one, it's not militarily necessary. It's not necessary. This is not, as my colleagues have said, a partisan issue. President Bush opposed it. The current president opposes it. It's not militarily necessary. And secondly, we can't afford it. As Representative Westmoreland said, we're broke. We are absolutely broke. I was talking to a colleague the other day who said, well, it's all about competition. And I said, well, if two engines are good, why not have 10? There'd be a whole lot of competition. He looked at me and he said, we can't afford that. I said, we can't afford two. We are broke. It's in that spirit that Representative Dold and I put a letter together to the president, and we are going to send that to the president tomorrow. We are seeking fellow members, colleagues, to sign on to the letter before it goes over to the White House. We have some copies here. So we got to cut this. We can't afford it. Thank you all.
Thank you. At a time when we've got deficits that are looking at about $1.48 trillion, a little bit over $3 million a minute in deficit spending, the time has come for us to look at every single department. So we need to take a look at the Department of Defense, as we need to look at every single department in the federal government. The American taxpayer, the families have tightened their belts. American businesses have tightened their belts. The federal government should be no difference. And we should make sure that we're looking at the Department of Defense and other areas on places that we can cut back on spending. There's no question the spending is out of control. This is a program here that has broad bipartisan support, support from multiple administrations. It's got support from the Department of Defense. This is an area where we can cut back on defense and not harm our ability to protect Americans and to be able to protect our borders. So we have an opportunity here to cut approximately $3 billion. This is an opportunity that we need to seize. We need to seize it today. We've asked the American public to tighten their belts. We need to do the same.
I'd open up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
When do you expect they'll vote on your amendment?
Hopefully today. I hope so. But I just asked our staff earlier before we stepped up onto the stage if we knew if it was today or not, and we don't know yet. So hopefully, within the near future, we'll know exactly when it's coming to a vote.
And what's your take on how many votes you're going to be able to get this time around in favor of your amendment and Mr. Griffin and Mr. Dold?
Well, that's what we've been working on over the last several weeks, especially with our freshman colleagues, is to try to make up the difference, obviously. I believe that it's very close. I believe that we're in good shape, and, if we can continue to put our message out there, especially to the freshmen, is, look, this is exactly why you were elected, is to get rid of this kind of wasteful spending that, may have been okay in the past, but the people aren't having it anymore. They're sick and tired of programs that might be seen as something nice to have. Look, I've been saying a lot in the last few days. It might be great to have two competing companies building the same engine, and we paying for that, and everything's fine and dandy. But those are just the type of things that the American people expect us to take a serious look at. And I appreciate especially the freshmen who have been thrown into this frying pan to see it for what it is. I mean, we're talking about $450 million right now versus a savings that may or may not happen over the next 50 years. Those are the kind of luxuries that we can't, wait for. So, if at all.
This is a political issue in the sense, though, that it's about jobs in the places where the alternate engines can go, including Speaker Boehner's industry. in Cincinnati, right?
Well, sure, and I personally wouldn't fault anybody that had like the speaker that had some of these parts or whatever made in their districts. I mean, I understand that they're protecting the jobs in their district, but we, I think, are looking. At least I'm looking at this as a whole in the country and on our budget, what we can and can't afford. And so that's why I've come down with this issue. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that?
I just want to add one thing, I think it's not often that we have an agency tell us that money people are voting to give them is wasteful. It just doesn't happen a lot. That's what we've got. We've got these agencies saying, hey, this is wasteful spending. And then I think if you look at the circumstances surrounding the timing of this vote versus the last vote, it's different. What we're hearing today is about the deficit, about the debt, about wasteful spending, about the budget. And so I think the circumstances drive what happens a lot of time. The timing is everything, and when these votes come up is a critical part of what that outcome is going to be. And so, look, it was an uphill battle. We're fighting against, at least some of us are fighting against our leadership on this, but it's the right thing to do. And I think the American people sent that message loud and clear November the 2nd that we've got to tighten our belts, and especially when the agency that is going to be the beneficiary of getting this money says it's wasteful, we need to listen to that.
Could I say just one thing on that? This is the best kind of oversight where the agency tells you where the waste is hidden. One thing on the jobs issue, because this is critical, and this doesn't impact my district either way. But the number one thing that we can do for jobs in this country is get our fiscal house in order. You can talk about jobs that the government funds here or jobs that the government funds there. That's a short-term approach that leads to nowhere and ultimately leads to cuts and elimination of programs because we are effectively bankrupt. So the number one thing that we can do for job growth in any district in America is to get our spending under control. And this is just a piece of it, but there are going to be a whole lot of pieces. And so I had someone in my district the other day say, what are you going to do for this particular county? And I said, the number one thing I can do for this county or any county in my district is get the federal budget back in order and get our fiscal books in balance. That's going to help job creation everywhere.
No, I just want to add, no one ever faults any member, and there are members in the Democratic and Republican side. You mentioned parochial interests. They are fighting on behalf of their constituents and the jobs, perceived or otherwise, in their district. But this goes beyond that. I know. I persevered through the downsizing of the F-22 at the recommendation of the administration and the C-17. This becomes a question of prioritizing for the nation that two administrations and the Secretary of Defense and every military entity has said they don't want it. And they know that dollars are short, and they have to prioritize. So we have to overcome, and that's what's so commendable about what my colleagues on the other side are doing. We put a majority of Democrats voted against this last year. Not enough to win, but a majority of the Democrats voted against this bill. I expect we'll have a majority again today. But this issue rises above the parochial interests because of all the other cuts that we're facing and looming. And those trade-offs and prioritization, I think, is the game changer in this vote today.
Is there frustration with GOP leadership that they're still supporting this program, even though the agencies have said that they don't need it? And as you said, they promised to cut spending, and they've said everything's on the table, but apparently this is not on that table.
Is there frustration with the leadership?
Yes.
I'm not going to speak for the leadership. You'll have to ask them. But
frustration on your side with leadership that they're not.
Well, I mean that's why I think that you have such a contentious fight here. I mean, there is a philosophy that that the leadership and those proponents of the second engine have said that over the long haul there could be savings if you have competition. That kind of speculation is just something that I don't think the American people have patience for right now. They want to see cuts, and they want to see them today. And that's what we're proposing to do. And, I think that even in our conference on the Republican side, you're seeing, people, besides just the cuts in the budget, you're seeing people that are apprehensive about cutting defense strictly from the standpoint that they believe that it's a keystone in preserving our liberty. And we had a meeting just the other day where a very prominent member and veteran, who I won't name because I didn't ask for permission, but somebody that commands the respect of everybody in Congress, got up and said there is waste in defense. And if he says that there's waste in defense, there's things that we can look at that don't have any effect on our troops, that don't have any effect on our ability to fight and win this country's wars.
Yeah, to the freshman, I would like to ask to the freshman, does this give you pause about Congress's ability to cut spending? I mean, here you have a program where the agency itself is saying, we don't have this money. And there's still a good chance that they might get that money. And there are going to be other programs, where they say, we need the money. What makes you think that Congress is going to go along and cut those? I
think we've got to take it on a case-by-case basis. And certainly in this instance right now, I can tell you that, look, we're going to reach across the aisle. We've got broad bipartisan support. We hope this does pass. With regard to the leadership is doing what they think is right on this, and they're going to advocate for what they believe is correct. I think it's our obligation that we're not going to go along with leadership on everything that they put forth, and we've got to represent the people of our districts, and we have to do what we think is right for the United States and for our fiscal house. We've got to tighten our belt at this point in time. And we've asked the American public to do that. We've asked businesses to do that. The federal government needs to do the same. This is an opportunity that we have to move forward on. And I think we've got to take a look at some of those areas that traditionally have not been necessarily put on the chopping block. And this is something that we can do.
How hard would you say Speaker Boehner and the other members of the leadership are working against your agenda?
Well, I think, obviously Speaker Boehner has a constituency that he's representing, as well as being the leader of the House in terms of the Speaker. But, in terms, he's going to advocate for his beliefs and what he wants to do. We're certainly trying to come out and make our case to our colleagues as well, that this is an area that we need to cut back, that multiple administrations have said this is something that we can do without. The military has. And let me just say, because I know that Congressman Rooney talked about a colleague of ours that we all respect. Let me just simply say my uncle was released from Vietnam in 1973, just a few days ago on its anniversary of February 12th. He spent 8 years and a day in Vietnam and actually was the one that actually came up with the name the Hanoi Hilton. There's no one out there that wants more than a strong military than I do. We need a strong military. They serve such an incredible and vital role. But there are areas within the military, within the Pentagon, that we can look at to say, are we spending those dollars wisely? Are they being efficient? This is an area that we can cut back, and I believe that there are many military leaders out there that will agree. And so this is one that they've come out to say this is a program that they do not need in order to safeguard the American public. And this is an opportunity that we need to seize, and we need to be able to reduce the spending in the United States government in every single department, including the Department of Defense.
Let me say something on that. I've heard arguments on both sides of this, and just because someone disagrees with me, but even on this issue, doesn't mean that I should impugn their motives. There are legitimate arguments, as Representative Rooney was referring to, that relate to competition and long-term cost savings and all these things. So it's not. I think that at 30,000 feet, we're going to agree, a lot of us are going to agree, that we ought to cut the waste. The question is, what I think is waste may not be what someone else thinks is waste. And I understand that. Some of that may be parochial, but the parochial aside, there are arguments to be made on both sides. I looked at the arguments, and based on the situation we have fiscally, I think that the best argument is get rid of this engine. But that does not mean that I am somehow belittling folks who disagree with me on this issue.
Congressman
And let me just add this about the leadership. I'm just proud that the leadership have opened up this process. I mean, what you're going to see today on the floor is something that I don't think has ever happened as far as an open rule on a CR. And look, there's going to be things that Mr. Larson and I are going to have differences of opinion of that's going to come up on the vote, because there's going to be many, many millions. There's probably, I don't know if millions of amendments, but there's going to be a lot of amendments. There's probably going to be some things that me and Mr. Rooney are going to vote different on. There's probably some things that we're all going to be voting different on at some time. I'm just glad that the leadership, even though their votes last time indicated they don't support the single issue engine, has allowed this process to be open and to let every representative, every one of us that represents 6 or 7 or 800,000 people, have an opportunity to try to amend this CR. So I think it speaks very highly of the leadership that regardless of what their personal beliefs are, they're opening up this process and giving us an opportunity to do what we think is best for the debt and the deficit.
I'll tell you. I'll just talk in broad terms and tell you that the number one source of information on this, I think it's fair to say we're colleagues. What I did was I just asked a whole lot of people. I certainly talked to people who had an interest. You know, they had information that they wanted to provide to offices. But what I would do is walk up to people and say, hey, where are you on that engine? And I'd listen to what they had to say, and I'd take this bit of information or that bit and research it some more. And you know, I've got outstanding staff who did a lot of research for me, and I don't have a parochial interest in this either way. I just said I'm going to look at both sides, and so. Did
you hear from the engine makers, both sides?
I have heard from. I have not met with them all, but I have heard from them, and I know their views.
We'll take one more. You know, the best way to avoid getting lobbied on an issue is to sponsor an amendment.
Can you talk about the Pentagon process? If Congress deadlocks on a CR and Gates goes ahead and tries to kill this program, isn't that an easier way to deal with this than trying to deal with it legislatively, which has failed over and over again? And then can you also address how you think Gates, what his options are? Can he just yank the money or?
Well, I think that the problem that you run into is then you let it get out of your hands. And we have an opportunity right now to try to address this issue rather than, whether or not Secretary Gates can effectively kill the second engine or not. We don't know. What we know is what we have in front of us right now with this amendment, and that's why we're trying to do what the Constitution, the American people expect us to do before it gets to the administrative. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that, but so we've got to take care of business ourselves rather than punting and hoping somebody else can take care of it. The people expect us to cut spending, and that's what my amendment allows us to do. With that, I just want to thank you all very much.
Thank you. Good deal. Yes, sir.